Every morning you fill up your tank, you're paying for a war you never voted for. And what is worse is that people are lying to you about where that war is headed. This video is not here to recap what happened. This video is here to help you understand what most mainstream media has refused to say plainly. The real mechanics of a war being redefined by language that gets softer every single day, while the reality gets harder every single day. I'm Tommy, and this channel delivers clear, objective analysis on the US and global economy. Before we continue, thanks a lot for tuning in. Your support is what keeps this show going, and I appreciate you watching. As always, please make sure to subscribe and like the video so I can keep bringing you these critical updates. Imagine you are an ordinary American standing at a gas station in Iowa in early March of 2026. The screen reads $3.72 per gallon. Last month, that number was under $3. You stare at the screen, look at your wallet, then at your watch. You do not understand why. But you sense that something has fundamentally changed, and it is no longer just about the price of gas. According to data from the American Automobile Association, as of March 15th, 2026, the national average gas price had risen 74 cents per gallon since the war began. Diesel prices were approaching $5 per gallon, $1.34 higher than the previous month. According to RBC Economics, if crude oil holds at $100 per barrel, American consumer spending will fall by between $50 and $150 billion this year. Low-income households, especially in rural Midwestern communities, are absorbing damage 2 to 3 times higher than their urban counterparts. If you watch this video to the end, you will not just understand why gas prices are rising. You will understand how a war is designed to exhaust an opponent economically, how language is used as a weapon against a government's own citizens, and how to identify who is actually controlling this game. The person who understands the logic of this war will read the world differently than everyone else. Here is what no one is telling you plainly. The United States military is retreating, not repositioning, not restructuring, retreating. The clearest place to begin is Kuwait, because that is where the collapse became impossible to hide. On March 1st, 2026, a single Iranian Shahed drone struck the port of Shuaiba. 6 American soldiers were killed. They were not frontline combat troops. They were logistics personnel from the 103rd Sustainment Command, an Army Reserve unit out of Des Moines, Iowa, working inside a civilian port facility. That drone arrived with no warning. That is not because Iran is more technically advanced. It is because the American early warning radar systems had already been destroyed before that moment. Bloomberg published satellite imagery showing radar arrays at Ali Al Salam Air Base and Camp Arifjan, both in Kuwait, had been completely destroyed. Those radars are what detect incoming missiles and drones before they reach a base. Without them, the entire defensive system becomes meaningless because there is nothing left to trigger it. In military terms, that is called operational blindness. A base that cannot see what is coming is a base that cannot be defended. And that is why, the moment those radars went down, the pullback began. Personnel started moving out of exposed positions, not because of a new strategic order, but because there was no other choice. On March 2nd, something worse happened. Kuwaiti air defenses shot down 3 American F-15 jets in a friendly fire incident caused by how severely situational awareness on the ground had degraded. 6 crew members survived. But the message was undeniable. Those positions could no longer be held. The United States began emptying them. The American embassy in Kuwait took a direct Iranian missile strike. Secretary of State Rubio ordered it closed immediately. A country that had been an American ally and a launching point for U.S. forces for 2 decades was no longer safe even for diplomats. Kuwait was not an isolated case. The same pattern played out across the region, country by country, with the same result. In Bahrain, the headquarters of the United States Navy 5th Fleet at Jaffer was hit by Iranian missiles on multiple occasions. The 5th Fleet is the coordination center for all American naval operations in the Gulf and the Arabian Sea. Having that headquarters struck repeatedly was not just material damage, it was a strategic message. Iran can hit the brain of the American Navy whenever it chooses. Hundreds of non-essential personnel had already been removed from those facilities before the war even started, and the attacks did not stop after. In Qatar, the situation was even more alarming. 2 low-flying Iranian bombers came within 2 minutes of reaching Al Udeid Air Base. Al Udeid is the largest American military base in the entire Middle East, housing approximately 10,000 troops and serving as the air operations coordination center for the entire region. That base had been partially evacuated not once, but twice before February 28th. When the largest hub has already been evacuated twice, the question is no longer whether the United States is pulling back. The question is how far back it has already gone. In Saudi Arabia, Prince Sultan Air Base was struck. Sergeant Benjamin Pennington was wounded there on March 1st and died on March 8th. His name represents a real person, a real death, buried beneath official statements and abstract casualty numbers. The American embassy in Riyadh was hit by drones and shut down. Saudi Arabia, the country the United States has protected for more than 80 years, was no longer safe even for a diplomatic building. In the UAE, the American consulate in Dubai was struck. Iranian state media then claimed that U.S. forces had quietly scattered into civilian port facilities at Jebel Ali, Khalifa, and Fujairah. That claim, whether verified or not, reflects what Iran believes is happening. American personnel moving out of identifiable military installations and taking shelter inside civilian infrastructure because the official bases are no longer safe to occupy. In Iraq, the American embassy issued a strong advisory for all U.S. citizens to leave the country as soon as they could do so safely. That is not a standard travel warning. That is a signal that even diplomats can no longer guarantee the safety of ordinary civilians. In Syria, American troops completed their withdrawal from Al Tanf and began pulling out of Kobani in the northeast. The total picture: 2 embassies closed after being struck, a full country departure advisory for Iraq, confirmed withdrawals from Syrian positions, and hundreds of personnel moved off Gulf bases before the first shot was even fired. 13 American service members killed, over 200 wounded across 7 countries. The United States calls all of that a tactical withdrawal. The New York Times calls it a redesign of the military presence. The White House prefers the phrase strategic relocation. 3 different labels, 1 single reality: retreat. Language being used as a coat of paint over something no one wants to name. But there is one detail that tears apart every one of those labels. This is not the first time these bases have been emptied. It is the third. On January 14th, 2026, 6 full weeks before the war started, Reuters reported that the United States was withdrawing some personnel from key bases in the region as a precaution. Staff at Al Udeid were told to leave by that evening. Britain pulled its people out too. The Qatari government confirmed the drawdown. Troops were dispersed to hotels and individual facilities, moved away from concentrated locations that would make easy targets. This happened because Iran sent a direct warning to every neighboring government: if America strikes, your bases become our targets. In late January, several Gulf governments took that warning seriously. They privately assured Tehran that their territory and airspace would not be used by Washington. The United States attacked anyway. And on February 28th, every base that had been partially evacuated in January was hit by Iranian missiles, exactly as Iran had said it would happen. In late February, days before the joint strike, the evacuations expanded for the second time. Hundreds of non-essential personnel were removed from Al Udeid and from Fifth Fleet facilities in Bahrain. Gulf News reported it was to reduce the exposure of forces. Turkey's Anadolu agency ran the headline without softening it: U.S. evacuates hundreds of troops from Qatar and Bahrain. Washington said nothing. 3 waves, same bases, same direction, out. And here is the pattern that reveals everything. In January, when nothing had yet happened, they called it a posture change. In late February, with a strike about to launch, they called it a precautionary evacuation. In March, with missiles landing, radars destroyed, embassies shuttered, and soldiers in coffins, they call it strategic relocation. The label gets softer every time. The reality gets heavier every time. Turkish media calls it leaving. Qatari outlets call it evacuating. The Jerusalem Post quoted the New York Times' own softened framing and ran with it. This is not terminology evolving. This is managed denial, maintained systematically and deliberately. But the military retreat is only half the story. The other half is playing out at sea, and it will cause damage long after the last missile lands. On March 2nd, a senior advisor to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps announced that the Strait of Hormuz was closed. Any vessel attempting to pass would be attacked and set ablaze. This was not the first time Iran had issued that threat, but it was the first time it was executed at a scale large enough to break the entire global commercial system. 21 confirmed attacks on merchant vessels took place between March 2nd and March 12th. Shipping traffic collapsed first by 70%, then to near zero for Western-flagged vessels. Over 150 ships anchored outside the strait, rather than risk the crossing. This is the largest disruption to global energy supply since the 1970s, when the Arab oil crisis sent Western economies into a tailspin for years. What most coverage misses is that Iran did not need a navy to accomplish this. 21 attacks were enough to break the entire private sector calculation. After the first strikes, most major underwriters at Lloyd's of London simply stopped writing new policies for Hormuz transit. Without insurance, no commercial vessel will sail. That is basic business logic. Under international maritime law, crew members have the legal right to refuse to enter a declared war zone. Some captains are reportedly being offered $500,000 per day just to attempt the crossing. That is not a functioning shipping lane. That is a gamble with human lives and a shipowner's capital. Even if every Iranian naval asset were destroyed tomorrow, the commercial infrastructure that makes global shipping possible through that corridor, the insurance frameworks, the crewing contracts, the port liability structures, has already collapsed. Rebuilding commercial confidence takes far longer than rebuilding a ship. 20% of the world's daily oil supply transits that waterway. 20% of global LNG does too. Brent crude rose from roughly $65 per barrel before the war to a peak of $126, the sharpest weekly increase since crude oil futures markets were established in 1983, according to CNBC. Qatar Energy declared force majeure on all LNG shipments on March 4th. Maersk, Hapag-Lloyd, MSC, and CMA CGM all suspended operations simultaneously. The damage is spreading well beyond energy. Urea fertilizer prices jumped by roughly $80 per ton from pre-war levels of around $470. Approximately one-third of global fertilizer trade transits the Strait of Hormuz. That price spike is arriving exactly as American farmers enter the spring planting window for corn and soybeans. Growers in Iowa, Illinois, and Nebraska are now recalculating their production costs with more expensive fertilizer, more expensive fuel, and still high interest rates on operating loans. Economic pressure from the Middle East is translating directly into livelihood pressure for American farmers 10,000 kilometers away. Iran then made a calculated move on March 5th, the most important strategic step that most observers failed to fully grasp. The strait was closed to American, Israeli, and Western allied vessels, but Turkish ships were cleared through. Indian-flagged carriers passed. Saudi tankers heading to India were allowed. China, which receives 45% of its oil imports through Hormuz, is negotiating directly with Tehran for guaranteed safe passage. Japan, which gets 70% of its Middle Eastern crude oil through the strait, has already asked its government to release strategic petroleum reserves. Iran turned a military blockade into a selective toll booth. This strategy is effective for two reasons. First, it avoids damaging major powers like China and India, which could apply diplomatic pressure or intervene. Second, it forces American allies to come to Tehran and negotiate for the right to pass, dismantling any anti-Iran coalition Washington might hope to build. American allies are sitting down with the country. America is bombing. That is not an alliance. That is every nation fending for itself. Saudi Arabia began rerouting crude oil through the Red Sea port of Yanbu via its east-west pipeline. By mid-March, tanker traffic at Saudi Red Sea ports had surged sharply, a visible sign of how much export volume was being rerouted away from Hormuz. Saudi Arabia pushed approximately 5,900,000 barrels per day through that pipeline, near its maximum capacity of close to 7 million barrels. But that still falls far short of the volumes that normally move through Hormuz. The gap cannot be closed, and the Red Sea route itself remains vulnerable to disruption. There is no clean workaround. Every alternative route is either too small, too slow, or too dangerous. The American response to all of this was staggeringly incoherent. Energy Secretary Chris Wright stated on March 13th that the Navy was not ready to escort oil tankers. Hours later, Treasury Secretary Bessent told Sky News that the Navy would begin escort operations as soon as militarily possible. Defense Secretary Hegseth dismissed the entire issue, saying there was no need to worry about it. Three officials inside the same government, three contradictory answers. That is not strategic management. That is chaos dressed in confident language. Trump called on allies to send warships. Japan declined. Australia declined. South Korea declined. The United Kingdom said it would not be drawn into the wider war. Germany said plainly, as long as this war continues, there will be no participation. Not a single allied nation committed a single vessel. That isolation is historically significant. During the Gulf War of 1990 to 1991, the United States led a coalition of 34 nations. In this war, that number is 0. Now consider the dimension of this conflict that receives the least coverage, yet may produce the longest-lasting humanitarian consequences: drinking water. On March 7th, Iran accused the United States of striking a desalination facility on Qeshm Island, an accusation Washington neither confirmed nor denied. On March 8th, Bahrain reported that an Iranian drone had damaged a desalination plant on its own territory. Those two events, occurring within 24 hours of each other, established a new and extremely dangerous logic of warfare. The Persian Gulf has no adequate natural freshwater sources. The entire life support system of the region runs on desalination. Approximately 400 plants across the Gulf states produce 40% of the world's desalinated water. Bahrain depends on those plants for roughly 90% of its daily drinking water. Kuwait is the same. Oman sits at 86%, Saudi Arabia at 70%. These are not backup systems. They are the entire water supply for 100 million people. During the Gulf War of 1990 to 1991, Iraq deliberately destroyed most of Kuwait's desalination capacity. It took years and billions of dollars to recover. The scale today is far larger, and the networks are more vulnerable because Gulf countries have no significant groundwater reserves remaining after decades of over-extraction. According to Al Jazeera, experts warn that if 30% of the region's desalination capacity were destroyed, Some areas could lose access to drinking water within 3 to 5 days. The logic Iran has established is cold and explicit. You strike our civilian infrastructure, we strike yours. And yours means the Gulf states hosting American troops on their soil. The Gulf governments did not agree to that when they allowed American bases on their territory. They agreed to be protected, not to become targets. That political calculation is shifting in real time, quietly but clearly, in every closed diplomatic exchange happening right now. And here is where the absence of a plan becomes impossible to disguise: the messaging from Washington. On March 1st, Trump told the Daily Mail the conflict would last about 4 weeks or so. On March 6th, he said there were no time limits. On March 10th, he called the war very complete. That same day, Defense Secretary Hegseth appeared on 60 Minutes and said this was only just the beginning. When a reporter asked Trump which statement was true, he said, "You could say both." White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt then said the initial timeline was 4 to 6 weeks. On March 15th, Trump told NBC that Iran was ready to make a deal, but the terms were not good enough. The following day, Iran's foreign minister went on CBS and said plainly, Iran has never asked for a ceasefire. This is not strategic flexibility. This is evidence of a government improvising without a clear plan, saying what sounds reasonable in the moment rather than what is true. The original plan had 3 objectives: air superiority, regime collapse, and a negotiated ceasefire. None were achieved. After the strikes on February 28th, a new IRGC commander was appointed within 24 hours. A new supreme leader was announced within 1 week. The ceasefire was rejected publicly and decisively. Not one ally agreed to help reopen Hormuz, and the State Department's top counterterrorism official resigned, stating that Iran posed no imminent threat before the strikes even began. According to the Marist poll published on March 5, 2026, 56% of Americans opposed or strongly opposed military action against Iran. The YouGov and Economist survey published March 16th found that only 36% of American voters approved of how Trump was handling the Iran crisis. 3/4 of respondents said they did not support deploying American ground troops to Iran. Those numbers say what official statements refuse to. There is no Plan B, no coalition, no clearly defined end state. Meanwhile, every Patriot interceptor the United States fires to destroy an Iranian drone costs between $3 and $4 million. Every Shahed drone Iran fires costs approximately $20,000 to $50,000 to produce. The exchange ratio is roughly 1 to 80, meaning Iran spends $1 to force the United States to spend 80. This is not a small asymmetry. This is the mechanics of a calculated war of attrition. According to the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, the Gulf states hold finite interceptor stockpiles. Iran does not face the same constraint because its Shahed drone production capacity has been significantly scaled up since 2022. Iran's launch rate has dropped 90% for ballistic missiles and 86% for drones compared to the first day of conflict. That does not mean Iran is weakening. It means Iran has shifted to phase 2 of its attrition strategy, launching less but more consistently, targeting civilian and commercial infrastructure rather than military bases, forcing every air defense battery in the region to remain activated around the clock, burning through irreplaceable munitions with each small salvo. Iran does not need to win this war on the battlefield. It only needs to sustain it long enough for the economic, political, and social cost to exceed what Washington can absorb. Every week, gas prices climb another cent in Iowa. Every week, another ally refuses to help. Every week, another set of contradictory statements comes out of the White House. Iran moves closer to its objective without firing a single long-range missile. The last thing to understand is why this war matters to you, whether you are in America or anywhere else on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a shipping lane, it is the circulatory system of the global economy. When it is blocked, it is not only gas prices that rise. Commodity prices rise, food prices rise, inflation returns, and interest rates may need to rise again to contain it. RBC Economics warns that a sustained oil price shock could push the United States inflation rate up by 1 to 2 percentage points within 6 months. For households still struggling with the elevated cost of living since the pandemic, that is a burden most are not prepared to carry. The person who understands the mechanics of this conflict understands why stock markets are volatile, why the dollar is strengthening even as the economy weakens, why gold prices are breaking records in consecutive weeks. These are not random events. They are the chain reaction of a global economic system processing a geopolitical shock without a credible coordinator. The question is not whether the United States is pulling back. That evidence is settled and cannot be honestly disputed. The real question, the question no one is answering, is this. What happens when a government runs out of words to describe what it refuses to name? When the language is exhausted, when every new label only reveals the emptiness beneath it, what is left? The person who knows how to read these signals does not just understand one war. They understand how power actually operates, how decisions are hidden behind language, and how events on the other side of the world shape the price of dinner on your table tonight. That is something no classroom teaches you, but whoever understands it will see the world differently from everyone else. Thanks so much for watching. I genuinely appreciate your support. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Who do you think is winning this war? Do you think it's getting out of hand? Let me know. Subscribe and like the video if you want to stay updated, and click the video on screen to see the next one. I'll see you soon.